Hi there, it's Llarold. Today I'm going to be talking about the Netherlight Crucible. This video will focus primarily on the traits you should prioritize as a protection warrior. If you want a refresher on how the Netherlight Crucible actually works, I made a video about that during the PTR and it's still accurate, so check it out. Tanks can't use simulation craft. As a result, I'll just simply try to make separate offensive and defensive recommendations so that you can have a clear picture of what traits you want to prioritize for your situation. So let's dive right into Netherlight Crucible traits. There are 6 light traits and 6 void traits, and you'll always be choosing between a light trait and a void trait in the second tier. These traits can be incredibly strong, some more so than the weapon traits down in tier 3, so you want to base your path through the relic on both the tier 2 and tier 3 rewards. So here are the defensive and offensive trait priorities. Now let's go through and break down these traits. First up, let's compare the stat traits. Haste is the best stat for warriors, and Mastery is a close second. This makes Light Speed and Master of Shadows extremely strong choices. The avoidance from Master of Shadows is a solid defensive bonus on its own if you're dealing with a lot of AoE damage, and the movement speed from Light Speed is okay on warriors. Versatility is a decent stat, which makes Murderous Intent a decent trait. It's a little unreliable, which isn't great for damage reduction, but it's okay. Crit is by far the worst stat for protection warriors, so Shocklight winds up being really bad. Next, let's compare the damage proc traits. Shadowbind and Chaotic Darkness basically do the same thing. Chaotic Darkness has a larger damage range, so RNG can take over a little bit, but they are tuned to do very near to the same amount of damage and healing over the course of a fight. These are the 2 best damage proc traits because they both provide damage and healing. Secure in the Light and Infusion of Light cannot trigger their heal components for protection warriors because Ignore Pain, despite being a great absorb, does not actually count as a heal. Since they deal just about as much damage as Shadowbind and Chaotic Darkness and don't provide any sort of healing at all, that makes them just strictly worse. Torment the Weak and Dark Sorrows also only deal damage, but the way that they work just doesn't interact well with how tanks are designed. Torment the Weak is all about keeping a dot rolling on a single target, but because Protection Warrior, and all tanks really, do a lot of AoE damage just in their basic rotation, your dot may fall off anytime you get into a multi-target situation. In single target scenarios, it's pretty great, but that's usually where tank damage is the weakest and least important. Dark Sorrows can deal a lot of damage in AoE, but it has a really long timer from the moment it procs until it actually goes off. If you kill a target that has Dark Sorrows active, it will automatically explode and deal AoE damage when it dies, so that is the one silver lining. The major problem with Dark Sorrows is that while it can deal a lot of damage in large-scale AoE, outside of AoE its damage is really laughable and the proc rate is really low. Let's finish with the 2 defense-only traits, Refractive Shell and Light's Embrace. Refractive Shell is worth quite a bit more healing than any other trait, and because it offers shielding, it's also not able to overheal. Light's Embrace provides about as much healing on average as Shadowbind and Chaotic Darkness. Because neither of these traits provide any useful damage output, they're just not that great. Now let's move on to artifact traits. Here are a couple of short priority lists for defensive and offensive weapon traits. Bastion of Aspects is better at reducing auto attack damage than Dragon Skin, but it's completely useless against spells and abilities. The versatility of Dragon Skin causes it to win out ever so slightly. Rage of the Fallen can outperform Thunder Crash on damage depending on whether or not you're using Thunder God's Vigor and how aggressive you are being with Rage. Generally, though, they're fairly close with each other, and it's really not that big of a deal between the two. I would say if you're trying to play really aggressive and more single target oriented, and you happen to have both of those right next to each other in the tree, Rage of the Fallen is probably the better choice, but again, it's fairly close. Overall, the top offensive and defensive protection artifact traits are really close in value, so you should give primary consideration to item level and the Tier 2 Netherlight Crucible options when figuring out whether a new relic is an upgrade. Well, I think that about covers it. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comments section below or on Twitter. Remember to like and subscribe, and give us a follow on Twitter and on Twitch. And thanks for watching. Bye.